محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So, very quickly, what were the 7 ahadith we've covered so far? So, no action without an intention. These are the titles that Imam Nawawi gave himself, right? La amala illa biniyya, or la amala bila niyya. Number 2, the levels of faith. Maratib ad-din, and he says they are what? 3? Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. The order could be played around with according to different narrations. Number 3, Arkan al-Islam, which is pillars of Islam. Hadith number 4, creation, lifespan, and sustenance or provision. Hadith number 5, the rejection of innovation or denouncing innovation, inkarul bid'ah. Hadith number 6, I didn't hear anything, but it's cautious piety and sincerity. Al-wara' wal-ikhlas. And the hadith number 7, so it's nasiha is a fundamental of faith or of religion, of the religion. Is of the fundamentals of the religion or a fundamental of the religion. And then number 8 is sanctity of a Muslim. Sanctity of a Muslim's blood and property. حرمة دم المسلم وماله. It's also called Hadith al-Jihad. Oh, someone chose the wrong day to come. It's going to be okay. At least I think so. It's a small number too, on a rainy day. It's perfect. So, these are the hadith that we've covered so far. 8 is what we're covering today. So, this is just a recap. We're always going to do this until you memorize them. You should know them by heart, at least their titles. If you memorize their wording by heart as well in Arabic and English, that's ideal as well. It's not that hard. If we cover it over 6 months or 8 months, it's a couple of words a day max, if even. It's not difficult to do at all, and everyone should strive to do it. But we were closing off hadith number 7, which is nasiha. And nasiha primarily means what? Sincerity, right? Purity and sincerity. It doesn't mean advice outright. That is a secondary meaning, that your relationship with somebody is so sincere that you're willing to give them advice, even if that means getting on their bad side, even if that means mentioning some of their bad qualities. Yes? النصيحة is النصيحة تشمل الإخلاص. So nasiha has ikhlas in it, but it's a little bit more comprehensive. So nasiha has 2 meanings. This is what we covered last week. We're trying to wrap it up here, but just very quickly, nasiha is divided, has 2 main meanings. One of them is at-tasfiyah, which is filtering, purification. Asal nasih is honey that's been filtered of the wax and the comb and all these other things that come naturally occurring in honey. So it's pure honey. So it's been filtered. And it also comes from the word, it also has the meaning of putting 2 things together. 2 things that have been separated and need to be put together. That's why the word minsaha means a needle, a stitching needle. So these are the 2 main meanings. So the Prophet ﷺ said the deen is all about nasiha, or deen is nasiha, ad-deenu nasiha. They said liman, to who? Who do we have? Who do we owe this nasiha? They understood these meanings, meaning the purification of the relationship and putting it together in the most complete fashion. You must have a pure relationship with these following things, and you must have a, today's the day that I'm the double parker. You must have a relationship that's pure and a relationship that's completely put together. They said with what exactly? He said with Allah and His book and His messenger and the leaders of the Muslim, and their common folk. 5 categories where you must have extremely pure relationships and a relationship that's completely put together in the correct fashion. So how do we know it doesn't mean advice? Because you can't advise Allah or His book or His messenger. The last 2 you could advise, right? The common folk of the Muslims and their leaders. So the meaning is applicable there. But with the first 3 categories, absolutely not. There's no advice that you can give here. So it means the other meanings, which is purity of the relationship and a completely sound relationship where you are together with these things in the correct fashion. So the last thing that was left off was actually giving nasiha in the way that we understand it, which is advising one another. This was the last part of the hadith that we didn't cover. Yes, Yusuf. Whoops. So, no, not necessarily, because in the pillars of Iman is believing in these things. It's a theological thing. I believe they exist, and I act accordingly. And this is just more of in how your day-to-day, how you deal in your day-to-day, your actions, and if they reflect a purity of this relationship. So yeah, they are pillars of Iman in the end of the day, but how do you interact with them daily? Because the bare level, and that's what we did last week, remember, we said the bare level of these things is to believe in them, that they exist, that they're real, that Allah is the one true God, that He's the ultimate truth. That's the bare level of having even any kind of relationship with Him. Then a nasiha, having a relationship that's nasuh, that's pure, that's well put together, we said that goes so much deeper and covers so many different things. In one word, if you want to put it in one word, a relationship with Allah that's nasuh, that has this purity, you would call it what? We said it last week. If you had to put it in one word, it's a holistic concept. If you had to, ihsan. It goes back to the same thing as ihsan. If you have ihsan, then that is a pure relationship with Allah, or as proper as it can be. And ihsan in general, towards His book, towards the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, and we covered it briefly last week. So the last thing that remains is nasiha as we understand it, which is to mean advice. And that it's still tied to the same meanings in the sense that your relationship is purified to the extent that it doesn't have any worldly things in between, right, with another Muslim. It's not focusing on the worldly things. And you want to stitch it together, you want it to be the most sound. And the most sound relationship, as we were talking about last week, is one that you won't regret on the Day of Judgment. And that's the default for all relationships. So even if we weren't the best of friends in this world, but it had nasiha in it, it was pure, it was sincere, it had mutual advice, then we won't regret it. And if we were the best of friends, the closest of companions, even spouses, but it doesn't have that nasiha in it, then we'll regret it on the Day of Judgment and we'll be opponents. Right? The ayat that began shortly before the ones that were read today in the second rak'ah, it says exactly that. الْأَخِلَّاءِ يَوْمَئِذٍ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ عَدُوٌّ إِلَّا الْمُتَّقِينَ. The best of friends on this day are enemies except for the pious on the Day of Judgment. So, very quickly, nasiha you need generally 4 things. It's not a comprehensive list as always, but just something that you can work with and that will be very practical inshallah. The first thing that you need is, of course, sincerity. Ikhlas. You need sincerity when you're giving nasiha. Now we're talking about nasiha in the way that we all understand it, and it's one of the meanings, the indirect meanings, which means to advise one another. And I want you to consider, when's the last time you asked someone for advice, for nasiha? And how did you react when you received it? What was it like? Was it to your liking, and why not? These are things that will help you gauge the sincerity. Sure? Sure, please.
I didn't like it.
Why not?
I asked for the honesty when I know I needed it, but I didn't want to hear it. So when it came, I was like, okay, this is the shift I have to make.
Yeah, that's a very common reaction where you don't like it when you receive it. It's not to your liking. It goes against what you had in mind. And these are all gauges of sincerity on the person who's giving it and the person who's receiving it. That's not to say that if you don't like it, you're insincere. But what do you do after and how do you react? So these are all gauges of sincerity. Hud alayhi salam, along with a bunch of other prophets, they all say variations of this sentence to their people. وَأَنَا لَكُمْ نَاصِحٌ أَمِينٌ. And I am to you a sincere advisor. I really care about this relationship, even though I'm telling you things you don't want to hear, even though there's a lot of friction now happening in this relationship. And before he gives them the nasiha, they tell him, قَدْ كُنْتَ فِينَا مَرْجُوًا قَبْلَ هَذَا. We had high hopes in you before this, before you started preaching, before you started advising us. We had high hopes in you. Maybe you'd be the leader. Maybe you're a nobleman. Then you start doing all of this, so the relationship is ruined. That's in their mind. In his mind, he's telling them, I'm being a sincere advisor by telling you this information. So it's not based on how they'll receive it. So a lot of times people say, I want to give nasiha, but I don't know how they'll react. That's not sincerity. That's already a break in the ikhlas if that's the main point of concern. I don't want to ruin this relationship. It was going so good up until now. If that is the main barrier to giving nasiha, that's a sign of insincerity, because you're in this relationship for what now? For that mutual friendship, for that mutual benefit, for that mutual hanging out or whatever it is. Now that that's in jeopardy, you refrain from giving advice. So you're not in it for the sake of Allah. This goes against the hadith that we started with, which is the nasiha, they said to who? The deen is nasiha, they said to who? He gave the 5 categories, and the last one is to all Muslims. So you're not having nasiha to all Muslims, and it's one of the 6 rights of the Muslim that everybody owes to each other, that if they seek nasiha, you give it to them sincerely. So if you refrain from doing that out of fear of upsetting them, out of fear of jeopardizing what you have, then that's not a sincere relationship. You're in it for the mutual benefit, for the mutual hangout, for whatever it may be. Because otherwise, you'd say, no, this is the truth. You're doing something wrong. I have to advise you. I have to teach you. I have to mention this to you. You're missing out on something that's obligatory. I have to do it. It's my job as a Muslim. It's my duty, as the Prophet ﷺ said to you as my fellow Muslim, to share this with you. That doesn't mean I just shoot from the hip, and if they like it, they get upset, they cry, it's fine, I walk away and I did my job. We're going to get to how to give the nasiha, but this is the first precursor. So gauge your emotion when you approach them to give nasiha. How do you feel? If you feel like vindicated and angry, and I'm going to put them in their place, it's a sign that it's not sincere. If you feel trepidation and fear at jeopardizing this relationship, that they just won't like you, that's a sign of insincerity. If you're afraid that they're going to get further and you won't be able to teach them, that's fine. Right? I don't want to jeopardize our proximity because this isn't giving me more opportunities to teach you. And I like your friendship. There's nothing wrong with liking the friendship and wanting to preserve it. But again, that shouldn't be a reason to hold back on advice or mention something someone needs. If you feel self-righteous, like, let me tell you what you're doing wrong and I'm not. No one says that sentence in their mind, but it's a feeling that you could, it's palpable. It's noticeable if you look for it. That I'm just feeling very haughty. I never did this. I don't do this now. Or I used to and I stopped. Let me put this person in their place. These are all indications of insincerity. Your reaction afterwards. How do you react after you give the nasiha? This also indicates sincerity or lack thereof. Will you be patient? Are you hopeful that maybe next time is going to work? Are you thinking of, okay, how can I approach this again if it didn't work? How can I shift gears maybe? Mention it differently. Bring someone else in on it. These are signs of sincerity. If it's like, oh, I guess you want to burn in hell then. It's up to you. Be a kafir. If you don't. Some people, they say statements like this and it's half joking, half let me put them in their place. They didn't take my advice, so let me tell them what's at stake here, but they're doing it completely wrong. Right? This is indications of insincerity as well. We have this, and this is all directly from the hadith. The Prophet taught us that a man from Bani Israel, a righteous man, he had a companion who was not so righteous. And he'd constantly advise him. And he'd always reject it. And then one day he told him, Wallahi, Allah will never forgive you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announces above the 7 heavens, Man dhal ladhi yata'alla alayya, who has the audacity to speak on my behalf? I have forgiven him and your actions are over. Start from new. Everything you've done is over. So that self-righteousness and that reason, that the desire for vindication, you have no right. If the Lord of these rights, the one who made this halal and haram, who's being violated, he's the one whose rights are being violated right now. He didn't send vindication upon this person and he's giving them time. Who are you to be so self-righteous and demand vindication immediately? Wasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala patient with you for so long? So all these thoughts are concurrent with sincerity, and a lack of them is a sign that there isn't sincerity. You had a hand up, Ahmed, sorry.
Yeah. Also, isn't that like a sign of arrogance? Like the whole you don't take it.
Yeah. No, 100%. It is a sign of arrogance. That you think you'd know better, or that this person, if they don't listen, that you judge their intention or pass judgment on them. Alaykum salam. Yes, ma'am.
The hadith that you just mentioned, did Allah talk to him directly, or was it told to him through a prophet?
No, it wasn't told to him in this narration that I have in front of me. It was it's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announces it, says it. So it's not said to this person directly. There's another narration it's not from the hadith, but it's from the stories of Bani Israel, that Isa alayhi salam, he was walking with his disciples, and there's a guy on their road, on their path, he's robbing a house. So he looks over outside the window as he's stealing stuff, and he sees Isa alayhi salam with his disciples, his hawariyin, his companions basically. And he says, look at these men, they're walking in the path of Allah, they're doing da'wah, and I'm here stealing. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it causes a light bulb to go off in his mind. So he leaves the stuff that he's stealing and he starts walking towards them. And as he approaches them, he says to himself, I just came from stealing, and these are people who are doing da'wah, worshiping Allah day in and day out, and there's a prophet with them. It makes no sense that I walk by their side. I'm going to walk some distance behind them. So as he's walking behind and following from a distance, one of the disciples turns around and says to himself, or thinks to himself, look at this dog following us. Like, what a horrible person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to Isa alayhi salam, tell the Hawari, the disciple of yours, that I have nullified his deeds to start over. He tells him, tell the disciple and the thief to start over, to start their lives over. For the same reason. For the Hawari, it's because he belittled the thief. And for the thief, it's because he belittled himself. So him seeing himself as so little, like I don't deserve it, that humility and that humbleness that he showed, Allah says, start over. Your deeds are anew. All your sins are gone. And for the disciple, belittling the same person, but with no right, start over because your arrogance has nullified your deeds. So it's a similar narration, just not from the hadith.
Was that a thing in Nabi Sallallahu time where Allah tells the prophet that they're all new or his deeds are all like he has to restart? Is that something that was also happening in Muhammad's time as well?
In Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's time? Not that I know of a hadith that says that in our tradition. But there are narrations of revelation coming about people's deeds, that this person earned good or their good was rejected. There's a hadith like that in our own tradition. So the next thing is to have sufficient knowledge. The same surah, the words of the prophets in different variations. أُبَلِّغُكُمْ رِسَالَاتِ رَبِّي وَأَنصَحُ لَكُمْ وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. This nasiha is predicated on what? I have knowledge from Allah, that which you do not have. I have the knowledge of what I'm saying. I'm not just shooting from the hip. And it's very important to have sufficient knowledge about what you're advising about. If you're going to give nasiha, do you know what you're talking about? Something that you should think about. Doesn't mean you have to be a scholar, but you should have enough knowledge about the topic which you want to do nasiha regarding. We have the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a group of his companions are traveling, and a boulder falls off of a cliff and strikes one of them in the head. And it exposes his skull underneath. It's a big wound. And that night he has a wet dream. So he asks the companions that he's with, I have a huge gash in my head. Do you guys think I can make tayammum? And they say, no. We don't see any, you're fully able, you're functioning fine, use water. So he washes with water, it enters his wound and he dies. And when this reaches the Prophet ﷺ, usually when people made mistakes, he was very patient. He was very, very accommodating and says, you didn't know better. But in this case, he says very harsh words. He says, قَتَلُوهُ قَتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ. They killed him, may Allah kill them. Very harsh hadith against them. Why? He says, don't they know that all they had to do was ask, I'm right here, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All they had to do was come here and say, this is what happened. Why did you rush to give an answer when you don't know? And then you cause someone to die. Your ignorance caused someone's life. So he made dua against them, and it was a very, very harsh rebuke from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they didn't have enough knowledge, but they spoke anyway, and then the sin is upon them. So there's the religious knowledge, right? The Islamic component of what you're talking about. Is there a difference of opinion? Is what they're doing valid, just not according to what you were taught? Is it something that's that has a wide scope of acceptable deeds, like where to put your hands in prayer, how to move your finger in tashahhud? Something that's very, very, that has a wide range of opinions that are all valid and all fine, and not major issues that affect the validity of the salah at all. And there's multiple opinions that are all sunnah and all rewardable, inshallah. Do you know that? Or are you going to do like those people that while they're praying, they push someone's hands down or grab their finger in tashahhud? There's stories like that, where someone's praying next to them and then the guy just goes, stop it. He doesn't say stop it, but he just... So that is a bigger violation, a bigger interruption of the salah, a bigger sin than if what they were doing happened to be wrong, which it's not. But this is doing nasiha without the proficient knowledge. Besides the Islamic knowledge, what other knowledge do you need to have? Huh? Worldly knowledge, so just have to be a scholar in like physics? So wisdom of the context. What's this person's personal tarbiyah level? What's their exposure to Islamic concepts? Maybe they have no idea about any of this. They're just brand new. So you got to take that into consideration. That should affect what you tell them. What is your own social currency with them? Like, what's your bank account with them? Do you have the ability to make a withdrawal? And that's what they call it. When I want something from you, it's called a social withdrawal. I'm making a withdrawal. I can't make a withdrawal if I never made a deposit. This doesn't mean that you have to be best friends or an expert in Islam to give nasiha. But all of these things, as they change, your nasiha should change accordingly. So this is someone who's brand new to the masjid, for example, I've never seen before. I have no social standing with them. I have no idea about their knowledge level. I have no idea about, what their exposure was to any of this before. Does that mean I can't give them nasiha? No. It just means that I have to tailor the nasiha accordingly. I'm not going to go to them the same way I'd go to my brother Yusuf. Just knock him straight on the head before I start talking, right? And I have that ability. I have the social currency. He's on his phone, right? I have extra markers today. So it is completely fine if I were to do that. I could call him out here, could apologize later, maybe I won't. It doesn't matter because I hopefully have the ability to do so. He's giving me much more of a runaround than this. So that's going to be completely different, right? So besides the Islamic knowledge and the context, which is this person's own baggage, you also need to know priorities, which could fall under Islamic. Could just make another extension of this. What are the priorities even within the Islamic paradigm? There's priorities. If this person, for example, doesn't pray at all, you wouldn't speak to them about growing their beard. Well, this side, you wouldn't speak to them about growing their beard at all, but you wouldn't prioritize or jump onto something that's not a major issue when they have a huge gaping hole in their faith and their commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if they don't pray the 5 daily prayers, their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't exist, period. It's hanging on by a thread. And it could not exist at all. It could just be in lip service. How can we establish that connection so that they can accept or even be willing to hear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants of them? So would it make sense to approach anything else while this huge gaping hole exists? So that's something that you need to know and to prioritize. And Surah Luqman summarizes beautifully in the ayat, the sequence of ayat from about the second page onwards, where Luqman alayhi salam is speaking to his son, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his words is advising all of us. So he begins with tawheed, that shirk is the greatest oppression. If you're misplacing your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or your trust in him or his names and attributes and what he could do, you're placing that somewhere else, that's the greatest oppression. You've already misplaced the greatest of rights and the greatest of responsibilities. So start there. Once that's established, the next and the sincerity is mentioned as well, where he says, whoever thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thanks for himself. وَمَن يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. Whoever is thankful and grateful, that's for you. And whoever disbelieves in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most self-sufficient and the richest beyond any of this. This is an indication of sincerity as well, that if you don't have it purely for the sake of Allah, he doesn't need any of it. The second thing that he mentions is, in the surah, what comes after the mention of tawheed? Parents. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. Then he tells them the duty of your parents. Even if they're kafir, even if they're commanding you with kufr, you still have a huge duty towards them. That's the next part of the ayat. After that, he tells them, establish the prayer and enjoin good and forbid evil, and then be patient upon what afflicts you because of that. And then he mentions how you should walk, how you should speak, so tazkiyah and manners. And doesn't mean if someone is missing all of these things, then you just absolutely only mention one ever, and you can never tell them, be more kind-hearted, be nicer. No, it just means that this is the priority and it should take the majority of the time and the effort of your nasiha. It's not all or nothing. The next thing is manners. Adab. The proper manners and mechanisms and tools of nasiha. Mechanisms, strategies, whatever you want to call it. And this has a couple of things that I'll put under it that are, again, not an exhaustive list. I'm going to keep saying this over and over just so anything else you read will add to this. So under manners, the first thing you'd need is, or one of the tools you could use rather, is the sandwich method. Anyone knows what this is? So before you give them advice, you give them a sandwich, because once people have a sandwich, they're super happy and their mouth is full. They can't talk back. No, that's not what it is. What it is that, what is it? Yeah, go ahead. I like mine better with the sandwich, but I'll take yours, which is you mention a positive first, positive quality of the person, and then the feedback you want to give them, the criticism, and then end with something positive again. That way, it's given in a nice package. We have a perfect example from the best of advisors, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the hadith of Salim, the son of Abdullah ibn Umar, radiyallahu anhum, who mentions from his father, which is Ibn Umar himself, Abdullah ibn Umar, the oldest son of Umar ibn Khattab, the narrator of today's hadith, hadith number 8, where he said, the Prophet ﷺ told me, Ni'ma ar-rajul Abdullah. Abdullah is such a great man. He's telling him, you're a great person, you're a good person. Ni'ma ar-rajul Abdullah, law kana yusalli min al-layl. If only he prayed at night. Like you don't pray qiyam al-layl. Instead of saying like, what are you, anything, fill in that blank. What are you, a lazy person? What do you don't care? No, he said, you're such a great person. If only you prayed qiyam al-layl, then you would be even better. That's basically what he's saying. Salim now says about his father, فَكَانَ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ لَا يَنَامُ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. After hearing this, he would barely sleep at night ever again. He'd spend most of his night in prayer. So it was, of course, the barakah of the words of the Prophet ﷺ, but at the same time, he put it in a very, very good package. Another thing is, which the Prophet ﷺ used, is he used his name. He said, Abdullah, he named him, even though he's speaking to him directly. People like to hear their names. And they naturally perk up their attention when you use their names and mention it. So drop the name. While you do while you're doing the advice or the criticism, you mention their name. It's very endearing to people. Instead of saying, you did this, you did that, you just say their name like, hey, Muayyad, I know that you tried very hard, and I think that was great. And I just want to mention there's one little thing. You're the man, you didn't do anything wrong. You're just sitting in front of me. So it's just more endearing to the person. It's more likely to have a natural, organic flow than to come in and just pretend you're their manager and here's this checklist of what I didn't like about what you did yesterday. Right? That's very less likely to be effective. We're going to mention examples after I mention all of them. That'll be faster. And the last one is affection. Is it the last one? I think so. To be affectionate. To be caring in the way that you do it. To be thankful in the way that people do things. To be appreciative and to show that you actually care. It's not that hard to do, but most people fail at it. Most people are not good at showing they actually care. They come in, like I mentioned, as if they're a manager, or they have a checklist, or that they've been watching you, and here's what I don't like about you. It comes off that way. People are less likely to agree to that. Look at the Prophet ﷺ, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes him. لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ. You're going to lose yourself, kill yourself, following them so they can be believers. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing him. لا تذهب نفسك عليهم حسرات. He says, don't let yourself disappear, wither away out of regret that they're not listening to you. He's telling us this is how the Prophet ﷺ is reacting when they're rejecting him. He didn't say, get lost, it's been 20 years, what else did you want? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, hey, don't kill yourself. We know how upset you are. We know how much this is bothering you. يَضِيقُ صَدْرَكَ. Your chest is constricted. You're unable to just go about living the fact that they're rejecting you. It's their loss. You did nothing wrong. But this is how he feels, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's a strong level of affection. We look at Luqman alayhi salam's advice himself. Ya bunay, oh my son. But they're both Muslims. Go with Nuh alayhi salam, whose son was a kafir, and who spent almost a millennium rejecting him. And at the very last moment, he says, Ya bunay yarkab ma'ana, oh my dear son, please get on the ark with us. One more term of endearment. Ibrahim alayhi salam's father, who was also a kafir and a chief idol maker of the village, and threatened to kill him. And he advises him 4 or 5 sentences, all in Surah Maryam, where he says what? Ya abati, oh my dear father. He could have said Abi, my father. Ya abati, my dear father. Daddy, basically. Trying to beg him, please, look at the things I'm about to say. Right? And he's already a teenager at least, if not older. So affection and endearment. We have the hadith that we always mention, one of my favorite hadith, where the young man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, idhan li biz-zina. O Messenger of Allah, give me permission to commit zina. Give me the green light, it's too much. And then the hadith says, فَصَاحَ النَّاسِ. People around him flipped out. فَزَجَرُوهُ. They all told him, get lost. Like, what are you doing? What kind of question is that? That's the kind of reaction everyone's having around him, the Sahaba themselves. And what do you think? It's a valid question. it's a valid request, it's something we'd all ridicule. And they'll say, what are you doing? You're asking a dumb question. You're making a silly request. So the Prophet ﷺ said, meh, everyone calm down. Relax, I got this. He's speaking to me, right? He's here to speak to me. Then he told them, قَرِّبُوهُ, let him get close. Everyone make room. They'd sit all around the Prophet ﷺ, all the way up to his knees, ﷺ. So he told them, make way so that he can come closer. Then when he came close, he sat at a distance, and the Prophet ﷺ told him, Udnu, you come even closer now, till he was directly in front of him. Then he told him the famous statements, the famous questions, which are what? Would you agree for your mother, for your sister, for your aunt? And with each one he replied, no, absolutely not, O Messenger of Allah, may I be sacrificed for you. Then at the end he told him, and likewise, people wouldn't like it for their moms or their sisters or their aunts or their cousins or whoever. Just like you wouldn't accept it, no one else would. And he didn't end it there. Then he put his hands on his chest, ﷺ, and he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma aghfir dhanbah wa tahir qalbah wa hassan farjah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive his sin and purify his heart and grant him chastity regarding his private parts. فَلَمْ يَكُنْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ الْفَتَى يَلْتَفِتْ إِلَى شَيْءٍ. And after that, he was not looking left or right. His gaze was on point. Not just from the blessed dua of the Prophet ﷺ, of course, that's the major factor, but also from his strong advice, right? His style of nasiha, when everybody else was flipping out, everyone else was reacting negatively, he gave him a very, very affectionate and sincere advice. We have the hadith of Mu'adh ibn Jabal where he says, I was walking with the Messenger ﷺ, فَأَخَذَ بِيَدِهِ, he took my hand in his. And he said, Ya Mu'adh, Wallahi inni la uhibbuk. O Mu'adh, I truly love you. Wallahi inni la uhibbuk. And he repeated again, I truly love you. I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I truly love you. Then he said, أوصيك يا معاذ لا تدعن في دبر كل صلاة تقول اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Do not allow any salah to be completed except you say at its end, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, aid me in mentioning you and thanking you and perfecting your worship. Is Mu'adh ever going to forget this advice? Right, look at the style that was given, how the Prophet ﷺ interacted with him. So this is all with the affection. And the last thing is practice. Don't shoot from the hip. If you want to give nasiha to somebody and it means a lot to you and they mean a lot to you, practice. Bring it up with somebody else. Say, what do you think of this? Will it work? How would you respond to this? Is this something that would make sense to you? And then you will get that feedback that someone say, hey, what are you doing? That's horrible. I'll never respond to that. Then you say, okay, I need to rework it. I didn't expect this advice. I didn't expect it to go south. Or maybe it'll be good and they'll say, but maybe consider doing this or that. And then you will tailor it and then you're ready. It's not for the first time as soon as you give it to them. So these are just 4 random things. Not random, but again, not exhaustive. How you can tailor your nasiha. If you're missing all of these things and you didn't perfect them, again, it doesn't mean you don't give nasiha. It just means if you know that you're missing all of these things, tailor your nasiha accordingly. Don't insist. Hit and run, as they say, which is you mention a little bit, then you back off if you're not getting positive feedback. You go back to these things and you check what you could do better. You don't have to become an expert at all of these things to give advice. You could still give advice, but make sure that you are considering all of these things to the best of your ability. And if one of them is missing, then tailor your nasiha accordingly. It could just be like, hey, what do you think of this? And then you back off. But you want to give more meaningful nasiha where you say, hey, I want to sit you down, I want to talk to you about something, then you better have done all of these things and considered them to the best of your ability. The last thing, is it the last thing? Yeah, it is the last thing. It's patience. After you do all of this, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4 is patience. These are the tools of giving nasiha to people. You have to be patient. Nuh alayhi salam preached for 950 years, almost a millennia, almost 1,000 years. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says the number of believers was 40. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولُو الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. So be patient the way that the prophets of greatest determination were patient. Who are the prophets of greatest determination? Ulul Azm. Jazakallah khairan. So it's Nuh. We got an order too. Jazakallah khairan. Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, and then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. These are the 5 greatest prophets that are called Ulul Azm, those of the greatest determination. So consider the words that he uses in Surah Nuh. He says, I spoke to them in public and in private, individuals and in groups, secretly and out loud. He pleaded with them. He said, Allah will forgive you. He said, this is your purpose. Allah created all of this. He gives you the things that you love, children and wealth and gardens, all these things that you seek. He kept going. And he did this for centuries. He could have just said, hey, 100 years, how much longer can you speak to somebody? And I want all of us to consider here, how long do you consider before you throw in the towel? How long do you consider before this person is done? There's no point. Save my time. How quickly do we pull that plug? Yeah, man.
I don't feel like there should be closing in on that topic. You should always leave it and let them breathe.
Yeah. There should never be a time where you throw in the towel or you say this person is done. We have no right to do that. The worst enemies of Islam were turned into allies because of this. And this story proves just that, which is the Prophet ﷺ is walking in Medina. And Islam has been ongoing now for maybe 18 years, 20 years, actually more, 20 years. It's the very end of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ is going to die in 2.5 years from now. So all the battles are done, all the back and forth is done. And now the Prophet ﷺ is walking with Medina and he runs into Al-Walid ibn Walid. Who's Al-Walid ibn Walid? The brother of Khalid ibn Walid. How many people knew that Khalid ibn Walid had a brother? And his name was Walid, the son of Walid. So he runs into Walid ibn Walid and he tells him, where's Khalid? This is the same man that caused their rout at Uhud and tens of companions to be slaughtered, including his own uncle. So he hurt him in ways that is unbearable pain. They said that we saw the Prophet ﷺ cry over Hamza the way that we saw him, never see him cry before ever again. They were like brothers. They were less than 1 year apart. They were nursed by the same wet nurse. So the loss that he has caused him is huge, directly because of his leadership at that battle. But he tells him, where's Khalid? And then Walid tells him, Allah will bring him. He says, Allah's going to bring him soon. And then he goes home, and from the Prophet ﷺ just prompting him and asking him, where's Khalid? He goes home and he starts writing a letter, and it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, amma ba'd, فإني لم أرى أعجب من ذهاب رأيك عن الإسلام وعقلك عقلك ومثل الإسلام يجهله أحد. He says, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful, the bestower of all mercy, I have never seen anything more amazing than you turning away from Islam while you have the mind that you have. You're a genius. How can someone like you not be interested in Islam? And something like Islam, can anybody be ignorant of? Can anyone just turn away and not be interested? He's saying, you are a gem. You're a genius. And I'm amazed that you're still not interested. And Islam is a gem. So what's missing here? Why are you not Muslim? Then he said, وَقَدْ سَأَلَنِي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم عَنْكَ فَقَالَ أَيْنَ خَالِدْ فَقُلْتِ يَأْتِ اللَّهُ بِهِ. The Messenger of Allah asked me about you. He said, where is Khalid? And I said, Allah will bring him. And then he said, because people like him would not be ignorant of Islam. It makes no sense. And then he said, he said, the Prophet he's telling Khalid, this is Al-Walid writing to Khalid, he says, tell Khalid that if he were to join us, if he were to come and become a Muslim, لَقَدَّمْنَاهُ عَلَى غَيْرِهِ, we're going to give him positions that we don't give others. We're waiting for him. We have stuff in store for him because of who he is and what he can do. So then he says, فَاسْتَرْدِكِ يَا أَخِي مَا قَدْ فَاتَكَ. So hurry up and catch up to what that has passed you. وَقَدْ فَاتَكَ مَوَاطِنُ صَالِحَةً. You have missed many opportunities for righteousness. There's a lot of things you've missed, but it's not too late. So please come. So Khalid's the one who's telling this story, by the way. He says, فَلَمَّا جَاءَنِي كِتَابَهُ نَشَطْتُ لِلْخُرُوجِ وَزَادَنِي رَغْبَةً فِي الْإِسْلَامِ. When I got this letter, I started getting ready to leave to Medina. That was it. After all this back and forth and warfare, this was the letter that changed everything. Look how simple it was. But it had everything that we just mentioned. Right? It had the affection, it had the name, it had the context. It had so much that made it appealing to him. And then he came immediately and he became the great Muslim that we know he was, radiallahu anhu. One last thing to mention, just as a general pointer, before we move on to hadith number 8, is you have to be accepting and be humble to either give nasiha or receive it. It goes both ways. Without humility, without not taking it personal, considering yourself in a very humble fashion, you won't be able to give it or receive it. This is one of the places where arrogance is the most destructive. Because when you give it and it's not received well, someone spits in your face or rejects you or curses you, it's very tempting to return that same mannerism in kind. Or at the very least, if you don't return it in kind, to say this person's done for, like he's the problem, she's the problem. As opposed to saying, maybe I wasn't sincere enough. Maybe this is just a test. Maybe I could be like Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, and I'm going to continue even if it takes 900 years. That takes sincerity and humility and humbleness to give it. And then receiving it as well. The first thing people think is what? What do they think when they get nasiha? It's the first response that you get. You think you're better than me? Right? It's like, who are you to give me nasiha? Didn't you just yesterday or just last week or just last year or didn't you just say that, or I heard you do this? Like right away a personal attack. That's the people's first instinct, first reaction. And that is a lack of humility. If it's true, it's true. Umar ibn Khattab, he stood in front of the people and he said, there's been a lot of influx of wealth into this ummah. So people are getting too luxurious. And the mahr is too high. People are asking too much money for marrying their daughters. So I'm going to set a standard. He's gathering the people, the townspeople of Medina. He said, we're going to set a standard. No one can ask for more than this. While he's talking, a woman stood up and said, Umar, what right do you have to do that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ آتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. If one of you give them a chunk of gold, don't take anything back. You have no right to take it back in the situation of marriage. So she's saying, Allah said a chunk. He didn't put an amount. So a chunk could be huge. Who are you to limit that? So Umar said, the woman is truthful and Umar doesn't know what he's talking about. Everyone go home. Nasiha, presidential decree cancelled. He gathers everyone to make the executive order. He says, never mind. I canceled it. Just go home. Because this woman's right. So it takes that humility. He didn't ask, like, who are you, random lady? Do you know who I am? I've been with Rasulullah my whole life. I'm the Khalifa. Kill her, right? Like people would say today, rulers of today, throw her in prison for even daring to speak up, which is not coincidentally the story of his own son, as we'll get to in a minute. But it takes humility. One more story of Umar al-Khattab, because he was the master of giving and accepting nasiha, even though times, and he knew exactly when to be rough with it and when to be soft and use all the tools available, because it could use some roughness. It doesn't mean that there's no place for rebuking people or putting them in their place, but that needs a lot of wisdom to know that it will do more good than harm. And that needs a lot of social capital that we were talking about, that bank account. I can make a huge withdrawal because I spent a lifetime making deposits. I can throw something at Yusuf right now and hit him in the forehead, and it'll be completely cool afterwards. It's because we have that social capital, right? I can make that huge deposit, that huge withdrawal because I've been depositing for his whole life. So Umar al-Khattab, he used to gather the companions that were alive at the time and available in Medina, as well as their students, in a council in his home. So he'd say, you guys stay around me, and when things happen, people come for disputes, people come for arbitration, you give me advice because you're the most knowledgeable about the deen. So one man, he was visiting Medina, and he heard that this gathering takes place. It's a gathering of the Sahaba and their students, the scholars, those who are the most knowledgeable. They hang out in Umar's house to get his advice. And it mentions here in the narration, kuhulan kanu aw shubbana, whether they were old men or young. Doesn't matter. He favored them by their merit and their knowledge. So some of them were very young, and some of them were old men. It all depends on how much knowledge they had. And Uyayna, he says, I was one of these people. Uyayna ibn Hisn. He says, I was one of these people. And he used to keep me close and seek my advice. And one day, visiting Medina was my cousin, Al-Hurr ibn Qais. And Al-Hurr ibn Qais is visiting Medina, and he says, hey Uyayna, I heard you're one of those people that hang out with Umar and give him advice and he only keeps the scholars. Can you get me in on this gathering? Can I come in there too and just see what happens, ask questions? So Uyayna says, sure, I can do that for you. So he gets him admitted, and he tells, oh Umar, this is my cousin. He wants to come to this gathering with us. So Umar says, fine, he's your cousin. I'll let him in. So as soon as he walks in, Al-Hurr goes to Umar and he says, Ya ibn al-Khattab, O son of al-Khattab. He doesn't even say Amir al-Mu'mineen, or he says, O son of al-Khattab, address him directly. And Umar wasn't really strict about that. People would call him out, Ya Umar, and he wouldn't care. But people who were more respectful, the Sahaba would say, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, leader of the believers. But Al-Hurr, as soon as he walks in, who's getting in on a favor from his cousin, who is one of the scholars that Umar keeps close, so he's already in on a favor. He comes in, he says, Ya ibn al-Khattab, Wallahi ma tu'tina al-jazl, wa ma tahkumu baynana bil-adl. You don't give us fairly, and you don't rule justly. You're a tyrant. So Al-Hurr, as soon as he walks in, he goes to Umar and he says this. So Al-Uyayn is the one who's saying the story. He says, Umar became very angry and he got up to grab him, like to manhandle him a little bit, like how dare you. And when he did that, I stood up and he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Inna Allah Ta'ala قال لنبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم خذ العفو وأمر بالعرف وأعرض عن الجاهلين وإن هذا من الجاهلين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells his prophet, O leader of the believers, just a reminder, he tells his prophet in Surah Al-A'raf, take with clemency, use clemency, command that which is good, and stay away from the ignorant. And I swear this man is ignorant. When he's talking about his own cousin, he's saying this is what Allah says, and this man's one of the ignorant that Allah's telling you to stay away from, to just turn away from, give them a blank slate and just ignore them. So he says, when I said that, Umar sat back down and his color changed back to normal. Why? كان وقافا عند كتاب الله. He was someone who constantly stopped at the verses of Allah. There were his checks and his balances. So look at the situation. He could have said, you're the one who brought him here. He's your cousin. I only let him in because of you. He didn't say anything. He just sat down. He said, you're right. He's ignorant. He's a fool. None of this makes sense. He knows himself. He knows what he's doing. He knows that he gives fairly. He knows that he's doing his best to be just, and that this person just, who knows what he wants. There's nothing you could do for him. So he just sat down, and that was the end of that. Uyayn didn't get punished. Al-Hurr just walks away, and that's the end. So let's do a quick practice before we start hadith number 8. Hadith number 8, we're not going to spend too much time on it, but we'll see if we get to it. It's not a priority to rush, inshallah. But just to consider how you would give nasihah. I want you guys to think about it, brothers and sisters, and to imagine a scenario now where how would you give nasihah in this scenario? So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he mentions in Ihya al-Ulumuddin, in the chapter of the duties of brotherhood, he says it was narrated from the stories of Bani Israel that two brothers were on top of a mountain in a monastery worshipping. They're isolated from everybody. They worship on top of a mountain. They come down every once in a while just to get supplies and they go back. That's what monks do, right? They're not engaged in the worldly life. They're focused on worship and they're completely abstaining from the dunya and they're just living a life of worship. And every few days, like I said, one of them goes down to get supplies and comes back and they eat from that for the next couple of days, rinse and repeat. So one of them goes down to get the food and they have a few meager pennies to buy whatever they can. It's a very, very simple life. And he doesn't come back. So his brother's waiting 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. After 3 days pass, what is this guy, dead? What happened? So he gets worried and he goes down from the mountain and he goes looking for him. And as he's searching in the town, he finds him with a prostitute. And he's sitting with her. And they're hanging out together. So first of all, how would you react here? Yeah.
I'd follow what the Prophet said.
Because
Because I think there was a story where a Sahaba was talking to a group of girls, and the Prophet came and asked him, what are you doing? I think Sahaba lied. He was like, oh, I'm just looking for my rope. But you don't assume. You just go ask him, why are you talking to her? Because there has to be the 3 P's, I think, purpose.
I'm like,
tag team.
I'll just ask him. I wouldn't assume. I'll just ask him what's your purpose to talking to her.
What are you doing here? That's what you do?
Yeah, why are you talking to her?
Okay.
You can't say that. That's a little I know what you're doing. What are you doing here? You gotta be
No, just why?
play the field.
What are you doing here? Is that better?
Hey, what's up? What's going on?
Hey, what's up? What's going on? Any other takers? How would you give nasihah in this situation?
First, you separate from whoever he's with. Just call him on the side.
Come on, talk to you.
How are you doing? Are you hungry? Let's go. We need to sit down and talk.
Let's go grab some blazed. Okay. Anything else, Yahya?
Where you guys trade off every so often to go down and come back. If you didn't come back for a while, the easiest, the most honest question is, why didn't you come back? Or what took you so long?
I was worried about you.
There's no harm in asking that in other circumstances.
Okay. I was worried about you, so I came to get you. It's been 3 days. I was also hungry. You didn't get us the food you were supposed to get. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead. So yeah, that's actually a saying from Umar, which is you give your brother 70 excuses. Okay? So you don't judge. So what would you do though? That's the question. So I'm not saying so you don't judge, sure, but then what do you do? How do you give the nasiha in this situation? Huh? We're lost? No, I'm saying what would you do in that situation? So I want to hear your take on giving nasiha now that you've heard a lot of the science behind it. Yeah, Ahmed. In life, what's your purpose? Why are you here? Where have you been the past 2 days? Okay, so it's similar to what Yahya said. Yusuf?
I would say,
Rock, paper, scissors between the Yusufs.
I would say like, what's up, name, and then I would say, you're a good man, what are you doing here? And then I would say, yeah, just first inquire, and then when he says that, be like, okay, let me speak to you over here, and then from there I'd probably advise him, and like, let's get out of here. I don't know.
By the way, he was going to buy meat from the butcher, and he saw her, and he fell in love with her, and he's been living with her for the last 3 days. Yeah. Let me add that context. You didn't know that yet. That's why I didn't tell you. He doesn't know that. But this is what the story is, by the way. I didn't share it with you on purpose. Does that change anything now? No? Okay. Other Yusuf?
It changes it now. I was going to double down with Zach. I was going to say he's probably trying to convert her to Islam, or maybe that's what I was thinking. But now it changes it since he got caught.
Okay. Anything else? Go ahead, Noor. Okay. It's a lot deeper than I thought, but you're right. No, there's a lot of angles to it. Let's do one more. Go ahead, Amr. Go ahead, Sheikh Mohammed, please. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sandwich method, yeah.
How about if they were married? They had 3 days, first day, second day he married her, and then now.
He's down on honeymoon.
Okay,
That's not what's happening though. Like
see the mindset.
I like it. You're the man. You're the best of us. It's usually known in a village or a town, like it's not a hidden secret. But so let me finish the story now. So he, as soon as he sees him, he jumps on him, and hold up. Violence is not the answer. No, he's hugging him, and he's saying, I've been looking for you. I've been so worried about you. And then the other guy pretends he doesn't know him. Completely ignores him. I never seen this man in my life. Now what do you do? Someone said punch. That's it. He used up all the capital, everything that he used. Yeah.
Leave him alone and catch him in private. You cannot speak to him in front of the person who changed who he was 3 days ago. You need to speak to that person.
So you retreat. This is not the context that will work. Okay. Anything else? Noor again. You had a hand up? No. Somebody else? Go ahead. Yahya. Okay, so similar to what Malik said, retreat, try to get him alone. Anything different? Yeah, go ahead, Dunya. Something like that. Just go for the press a little bit on the gas. Okay. There's no right or wrong. There is definitely a wrong answer, and there's a right answer. But in general, here there's no one answer that I'm looking from anybody. I just want to see what you think. Malik.
I said what I said because normally
So she said, by the way, that she would whisper in his ear like, "Hey, it's not worth it. This has bad consequences."
I said what I said because there's a third party involved.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Completely new.
You're going to give him one of these, right?
Because that might keep him with the prostitute.
Yeah.
But you approach it in another
No, I get it. It's a completely different scenario when it's like, hey, I know you know me. Sure. Anything different? Go ahead. So retreat and try again. That seems like the general sentiment. So he jumps on him and he hugs him again and he tells him, come, my brother, for I know your condition and your story. I know exactly what's going on here. And you were never better loved or more dear to me than you are now. It's completely okay. I still want you to come back with me. When he tells him, I have no idea who you are, he tells him, you've never been more dear to me than this situation right now. My love for you has not decreased the least. And I want you to come and we'll talk. And then he gets up and he leaves with him. And he returns to their worship. Starts anew. It's not always what you expect. Sometimes it's a little bit more affection. Not that bringing up consequences or punishment is wrong. It's part of nasiha as well. We have raghab and rahab, or the hopefulness and the fearfulness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions His servants worshipping Him with, that they need to be advised and they need to be encouraged and they need to be warned. It's all of it. But very often, as the Prophet ﷺ told Aisha radiallahu anha, that rifq, gentleness, softness is not added to anything except it makes it more beautiful. And it's not taken away from anything except it makes it ugly. And in this situation, he is not in a position of authority over him. It's not like his dad who would say, "You're coming." His dad could possibly say, "You're coming with me right now," and it wouldn't be wrong in the least. These are brothers. These are equals. And in his mind, what does he want to do? I need him to come. I need us to go back to what we were doing. I can't leave him here. I can't just leave him, abandon him because of a mistake that he made. So it's very, very interesting. And you think of the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How many times, like we just mentioned, Khadim Walid. He's asking about him after 20 years of him rejecting Islam and causing bloodshed and harm. He's saying, where is he? We want him. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's the first teacher of this prime example. And whenever you're in a position to give nasiha, or it's expected of you, or you feel like it's your duty, stop and think for a second. How gentle can I make this? What are you losing? Right? What are you losing if you max the dial of gentleness? The opportunity to be harsh, to use a little bit of gasoline, is always there. It's never going to go away. But once you do that, the opportunity to tone it down and become gentle is very difficult to recapture. Use gentleness as much as you can until you've exhausted it, and exhaust it some more, because you can always turn up the dial. But it's very difficult to turn it down after you've yelled at someone or put them in their place or embarrassed them, none of which is usually nasiha at all. People, the man that was brought in front of Rasulullah for drinking once, twice, 3 times, until someone said, may Allah curse you, how often you're going to be brought here for the same thing, you have no shame. And he said, don't you dare. He loves Allah and His Messenger. Don't be an aid for shaitan against your brother. He needs you right now, and that's not what you're doing. So it's very, very easy to turn up the dial, and very difficult to keep it on the lowest setting and see if you can go lower in terms of how gentle you can be. Go ahead, Am.
What is number 3 on the board? I just can't see it.
Just say you hate my handwriting. Manners and tools.
And then the second thing is, what if you're doing this
Oh.
same
That's not keeping it, okay.
what if you're doing the same sin that you're giving advice to someone else? Can you do that or no?
You can. You don't have to be perfect to give nasiha, but you should definitely try to work on yourself too. Give nasiha to yourself. But this is like someone who says, I can't do da'wah because I'm not perfect. And I always give this story. Well, I don't want to get into the story, it's going to take time. But the point is, someone said the example of like doing the dishes when your hands are dirty. Your hands are bound to get cleaned as you clean the dishes. Right? I didn't make it up, but I'll take the credit. Thank you. Yeah.
Because you're saying, like, give advice, being nice, but how about if you know the person and the other way works better? Like, you're soft, not being soft, but like you come to them gentle, like that won't cross, like that won't get them the message. But if you're like, hey, black and white, you need to do this, you have to stop doing this and keep doing this, this is what's going to happen. And they're like, thank you for.
That's not contradictory to gentleness. For you to say, hey, I need you to do this, doesn't mean you're not being gentle anymore. if you know that they'll receive it well. So what's the opposite of gentleness is harshness, like where you're saying, putting the person down, maybe using names, making fun of them. This is what we're talking about, the opposite spectrum. You could still be doing gentle nasiha and advice, even if you're a little bit forceful. It's just that be careful with the forcefulness, because it's very often mistaken with accuracy or efficiency when it's just people letting out their own rage or them being upset or whatever. So if somebody will respond and you have that social currency, that capital with them, and that experience that they will respond to a little bit of forcefulness, that's fine. But the Prophet ﷺ used that as well. I'm not saying it's only gentleness forever. I'm just saying that, keep in mind, this is the default, and this is the most effective. Go ahead, Ahmed, then we'll move on to hadith number 8 very quickly.
Isn't it probably dangerous to try to give nasiha on the same mistake you do? Because like, isn't there a hadith? Maybe I heard it wrong that like you shouldn't give advice on something that you're not, at least not doing the same mistake for.
Not that I'm familiar with. If anybody else knows it, they can enlighten us. But the same mistake that you're doing, it's not contradictory or hypocrisy for you to say this is haram and you should stop it. You're working on it too. You could say, hey, I know how this feels. That's where you use your wisdom. I know how this feels to struggle with this. I'm working on it too. And I want you to be my companion in getting better. Right? You could say it like that, especially if they know it about you. Or you could say, this is something that, again, use all these methods and tailor them accordingly if they know that this is something that you do as well, and tell them this doesn't contradict the fact that I want us both to be better. You work on it and I'll work on it too. I'm not saying that you better stop because you're a hypocrite and you're evil and how could you do this and you have no shame, there's no blood in your face, how do you go to sleep at night? They'll be like, how do you go to sleep at night, right? And that's not going to work, as opposed to the what I said earlier, and you could play around with that as you see fit. But if you use that second method, then of course they're going to react negatively and say, what are you talking about? You did this yesterday. You're doing it now, right? They might just, they're naturally going to revert to that. So it's not contradictory to give nasiha on something you're still struggling with, but you need to tailor it accordingly, especially if they know that. If they don't know that, again, you just use the proper methods, and you're not giving any sense that you're superior. You're just trying to advise them. As the scholars mentioned this, they say if people waited for perfection to give nasiha, then no one would give nasiha to anybody. Any questions, comments? So we're just going to mention hadith number 8 briefly. We won't take too long with it. And then we'll finish it next week, inshallah. Who wants to read it for us? Hadith number 8, حُرْمُ الدَّمِ الْمُسْلِمُ وَمَالِهِ, the sanctity of Muslim blood and wealth. Go ahead, sister. You waited too long. Trains left the station. Jazakallah khairan. Someone read English? This side? It's English. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Now you know why it's called the Hadith of Jihad, but we won't cover all of it now. But just very briefly, the Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith of Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them, I have been ordered to fight against the people until they testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and until they establish the salah and pay the zakah. And if they do so, then they will have gained protection from me regarding their lives and their property, unless according to Islam. And their ultimate reckoning will be with Allah the Almighty. It's Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, the height of authenticity. Very quickly about the narrator Ibn Umar. He was the narrator of hadith number, we already passed the hadith that he was in hadith number 3, but we didn't do his biography. Very briefly, he was born 10 years before the Hijrah, and he became Muslim at the same time of his father Umar ibn Khattab, which is about 8 years or 7 years before the Hijrah. So he became Muslim around 3 years old. He tried to attend the Battle of Badr. At the time he was around 12 or 13, and the Prophet ﷺ sent him back. And he mentions about him and other people around him who were around the same age, that when the Rasulullah ﷺ came to look at people, to size them up, we tiptoed and puffed out our chests, right, to join Rasulullah ﷺ in battle. They weren't afraid. And then he sent them back when he said, how old are you? And they said 13 or 12. He said, go home. And then he said, we tried again at Uhud, and he sent us home. And then in the battle of Khandaq, when I was 15 years old, he brought him forward and he joined the Prophet ﷺ, and he never missed a single battle after the battle of Khandaq. And this showed the Prophet ﷺ didn't accept anyone under 15. There are some exceptions here and there, but this was the norm. He's known as one of the four Abadillah, one of the four Abdullahs, who were famous for narrating hadith and teaching people the deen in that second generation. So who are the four Abdullahs? The first one is Abdullah ibn Umar that we're talking about now. Who are the other three? Abdullah ibn Abbas. No, he dies in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. He dies in the battle of Mu'tah. Yes, in the battle of Mu'tah, so he didn't spread knowledge. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is not one of them, because Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was a little bit older, so he dies in the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab. So he doesn't have that big of a role. But these Sahaba, they lived to the very next generation. In fact, some of these four are of the oldest Sahaba. So Abdullah ibn Amr and Abdullah ibn Zubayr. So they're Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab, Abdullah ibn Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, and Abdullah ibn Zubayr ibn Awam. So these are the four Abdullahs that they live decades now into Islam. They teach the next generation, so they become famous as the four Abdullahs. Abdullah ibn Umar is the second greatest narrator of hadith in our history, with around 2,600 hadith that he narrated directly from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number one is who? Aisha is number 3 or 4. Abu Hurairah is number 1. And he was famous for doing everything exactly as Rasulullah ﷺ did it. People would see him do stuff, the way he sat, the way he worshipped, and say, why are you doing it this way? And he said, I saw Rasulullah ﷺ with my own eyes doing this. He became famous for this. And he would never sit to speak about him except that he would shake and his eyes would tear out of the reverence that he had for Rasulullah ﷺ. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he was at the forefront of the conquests, from east to west, in Persia, in Iraq, in Asham, all the way west to North Africa. He was just bouncing around, joining the expeditions that the different khulafa sent first Abu Bakr, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and onwards. He returns to Medina towards the middle to the end of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan. And when he returns, Uthman ibn Affan says, you're going to be a judge. We want you to be one of the main judges of this city that will pass rulings. And he refuses. He says, I don't want this position. I'm not interested. And when the fitna happened and the Khawarij, or the people who the precursors to the Khawarij, as we spoke about last Friday, they surrounded Uthman's home, he went and he grabbed Umar's sword and he put it on, and everyone would recognize it. And he went to go and defend him, but Uthman was constantly sending them back, and he tried to defend him on the day that he was killed, but Uthman refused. After the assassination and the turmoil that happened, that again we discussed briefly a couple of Fridays ago, he refrained from all political adventures. And he was constantly sought upon because of his position. The people told him, Anta Sayyidun Nas, Ibn Sayyidun Nas. You are the master of the people, the son of their master. Everyone recognizes your authority. If you were to take a stance, if you were to make a decision, people just flock around you, whichever side you side with. And he said, I refuse, never. Ali radiallahu anhu now becomes the Khalifa and tries to appoint him as an Emir. He refuses. When the battle of Siffin occurred between him and Muawiyah, they came to him and they said, in this dispute, people are choosing Ali, people are choosing Muawiyah, may Allah be pleased with both of them. You can come and settle all this by stepping forward. They'll both agree on you and you be the Khalifa. No one will differ. And he said, I absolutely refuse. Again, he said, Wallahi la yuraku fiyya mahjamata min dam wala fi sababi ma kana fihi ruh. I swear by Allah that not a single cup of blood will ever be spilled in my name, or a single thing with a soul will lose it because of me. After seeing what happened, he said, absolutely not. I will not side with him or with him. I will not take any stance because blood is being spilled, and that's a big deal in front of the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They asked him, why? You're so prominent, you're so influential, you clearly have wisdom, you lived with Rasulullah, people will just listen to you, why don't you take a stance? He said, the example that I'll give you is like a group of people who were walking on a path, and then a dark night fell upon them, a thick blackness, absence of light. And then in that absence of light, a group of them said, let's go left, and a group of them said, let's go right. And as for me and people like me, we said we're going to stay where we are until the sun comes up, and then we will continue on the same path that we started. while they'll be far right and far left, they're going to miss the path. This is how I see it. So you're going to judge me, you might call me a coward, you'll say that this was this or that. This is my viewpoint of things. He stays apolitical through the time of Ali, then the time of Muawiyah, then Muawiyah's son Yazid, and then their cousin Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the next Khalifa after that. And at this point now it's 73 or 72 Hijri, he's 83 years old. And he has lost his vision, he's a very old man. And Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, he appoints as the governor of Hijaz initially, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, who is a tyrant, an oppressor. He doesn't think twice about killing people left and right, kills the children of many Sahaba, kills Sahaba themselves at times. And he just, anybody, if you stand up, when he came to Iraq, which is after this, he told the people of Iraq, I see your heads have become very necky. Like you've gotten really long necks. He's trying to say like, I can take care of that. This was his inauguration speech, right? So this is the kind of style that he had to approach to rulership. And then he starts to make decisions and speeches in public that are calling out other people, defaming some Sahaba at times. So Ibn Umar begins to confront him. He tells him, that's not true. That's a lie. One time he is talking and he prolongs his speech, and they're all political in nature. And while he's prolonging his speech, he stands up and he says, hey, we're going to pray right now. It's time for Salah. And you're occupying the prayer space. And then he says, like, I'm the Amir. I have the right to speak. And he says, let us pray, then you can continue your nonsense, continue your babbling. He says it just like that. So then Al-Hajjaj, of course, is not going to take that, and he makes some public threats towards him that maybe soon they're going to see you dragged through the streets. Don't make me do this. And they have this kind of back and forth several times. But now he's 83 years old, right? He's an old man. And in the year 73 after the Hijrah, during the Hajj, someone stabs him with a poisoned dagger in his leg or his foot. And he gets ill for a few days. And Al-Hajjaj visits him in his death illness, and he tells him, if I knew who did this to you, I would strike their neck. So Ibn Umar tells him, you did this to me. It was you. And there's different interpretations to this because of what he says next. Some say that he says, you're behind it. You publicly threatened me several times. I've been opposing you. Ibn Umar is very influential. He knows. And the Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, they all know that people like Ibn Umar have a strong ability to cause a revolution if they so chose. And the story of Abdullah ibn Zubayr right before this, maybe something we could cover another time. They were very worried about this. So he says it was you. And he says, how? He says, because the day that you allowed weaponry to come into the haram. That's the story of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. We can probably cover another time. He's like, you allowed weaponry into the haram and bloodshed, so you're the one who opened the door. That's one interpretation, to open the door for people to willingly attack someone at Hajj, for example. And some say it was a direct accusation. You're behind this. You're the one who had this done. Who knows? So when he exited, in the next few hours, he began to pass away. And they said his last words were, مَا آسَى مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا عَلَى ثَلَاث ظَمَأُ الْهَوَاجِرِ وَمُكَابَةَ اللَّيْلِ وَأَلَّا أَكُونَ قَاتَلْتَ هَذِهِ الْفِئَةِ الْبَاغِيَةِ. There's nothing that I regret in this worldly life, leaving behind except three things, three situations. Number one is the thirst on long days in fasting, and the tiredness of standing, the struggle of standing up at long nights. Remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, what did he say about Abdullah ibn Umar? He said, if only he prayed at night. That's the only thing he's missing. Now he's on his deathbed. He's saying, if there's something that I miss, it's the fasting and long days and struggling through the night to stand in prayer. I miss that. And the last thing is that I didn't stand with Ali against Muawiyah. I wish that I made that decision and stood against him. It's not clear cut. It's not always black and white. It's so easy to look at it hindsight and get it all figured out. But at the same time, the position of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is we don't analyze it to that extent. But this is just at face value what he said on his deathbed, that I wish I stood against the oppressive side. And in this narration, he doesn't say the name. In another narration, he says, I wish I stood with Ali radiallahu anhu at the time where he called me to. The last thing that I'll mention is this hadith says, I was commanded to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah. In one narration, he mentions just La ilaha illallah. In this one, that in 40 Nawawi, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, he mentions the prayer and the zakah as well. In one narration, he also adds Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or it's reduced to, they say La ilaha illallah, they face our qibla, and they slaughter the way we slaughter, meaning the animals. They share with us these tenets of faith. So Islam preaches that you guys go to war with people until they believe in your faith. What's up with that? Did you just hear the hadith? So we should abandon this hadith. So what is the interpretation? Now I know. So you're all Muslim adults, right? Right? Nod your head at least. Have some dignity. So you're going to get this question. Here of Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, the height of authenticity. Something that's in Bukhari and Muslim's collections means both of their collections at the same time. There's no way you could say, well, it's not authentic. No, this is the height of authenticity. And here's your Prophet ﷺ saying, I was commanded to fight people until they say La ilaha illallah and pray and give zakah. So your religion came to put us all to the sword if we don't believe in it.
I think the hadith refers to the people of Mecca at the time.
It says people here.
I know, but I think at least what I remember from the hadith, it was referring to the people of Mecca.
So it's number 2 is missing right now.
Yeah, that's what's missing. That's what I want you guys to think about.
Is there more context to the hadith?
There's always more context. Somebody who comes and asks you these questions this fashion, this is exactly how it happens. What would you respond is my question. He said, uqatil. So I'm someone again who's coming at you with it at face value. This hadith, this is what it says. How would you respond? So you're going to ask them, is fighting only with the sword? They're like, I don't know, it's your religion, dude. Yeah.
In the context, it clearly not like the Arabs, because other times they said the nest, and it's talking about the Arabs only. Because you want the Arabian peninsula to be like a Muslim nest.
So this hadith has none of that. Why should I believe you?
Because you see the application of the Sahaba and the Prophet.
Okay. What was their application?
They did it in Arabia only.
So they never fought people outside of Arabia?
No, they did, but like,
They definitely did.
I don't know. I was told that it's just not.
A couple of you started off strong, then fizzled. Like you were on the right track. Yeah, go ahead, sister. It sounds pretty physical to me. I was commanded to fight people until they say this. And if they do, their blood and their wealth is safe for me. That sounds pretty physical to me. So they must convert. So you must convert or you get fought against. You're agreeing to it. Maryam? Yeah, it's from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, didn't I?
Every battle doesn't become like that. If you fight with someone, you don't become right away, you don't start to use the sword. It's a lot of communication going on.
So you'll talk to me first, I say no. You show me the proofs, I say no, then you'll fight me? Hey, it's valid. Yeah.
Is this like a lot of specific people that wronged first? So it's either answer Islam or you're gonna get cooked.
Are you asking me? I'm asking you. We're going to do the explanation next week. Right now, I just want to put it at face value of someone comes at you with this hadith, asks you these questions. If you look like a deer in headlights, which you guys look like now, what happens to a deer in headlights? It gets run over. Yeah. Go ahead, Zach.
I don't think it's the right answer, but I was just going to be like,
Why are you going to say it?
no, because I was going to say, like, I don't know, but I'll take you to someone, like, more
That's
knowledgeable, because if you, like, how I thought about it, I don't know if I have the people wrong, but when someone was traveling all the way to the Madrid, and he had all these questions, and that's someone that's very knowledgeable, and he was like, I don't know, but then also, this guy's not Muslim.
There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't have the answer right now, and I'll get back to you. I'm not a scholar. I don't know, or I can take you to someone who knows. Don't give him my number. But there's nothing wrong with saying that. That's not a cop-out. Because the alternative is to speak without knowledge, and then you're liable for that. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. I don't have the answer right now. A couple of you did kind of have the answer, but then you couldn't stand up to the... Did you look it up on your phone? You don't got to ihlif, I believe you. I'll get back to you.
This is like before a war, right? Like, for example.
No. Yeah. Let me just, because we're running out of time. So very quickly, guys, because we won't do the explanation now at all. We'll do that next week. But 3 things that you need to know. Number 1 is that, first of all, the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. If you don't know his life, you won't have this answer ready. But if you know his life, even if you don't memorize it, you would know, did he live his whole life fighting people? No, he didn't. They might come at you and say, well, he went on 27 military expeditions. Yeah, and preaching for 23 years, the first 13 of them, it was haram for him to lift a weapon. And in the final 10 of them, out of those 27 or 25 expeditions, there was actual fighting in 9 of them. And even in those 9, they had a lower death toll than any of the previous conflicts of Arabia ever. So his life itself is a testament that this is not what this hadith means, because that's not what he did. So he didn't live this life of constantly fighting people till they say La ilaha illallah. He did diplomacy. He went and spoke people. He forgave people that tried to assassinate him. He forgave the entire city of Mecca. So there was other methods that were used clearly besides jihad, even though jihad was there. And we'll get to that. But first of all, his life is a testament that this is not what this hadith directly means, because this isn't what he lived the whole time, fighting people constantly. What warriors did he send to Yemen or Bahrain? None, right? These people accept Islam out of their own volition. He didn't say, I'm going to send an army to you, and then they said, fine, we'll become Muslim. Even though he did do that method elsewhere, and we're going to get to that. So number one, his own lifestyle. Second of all is the lifestyle and the biography of his successors. There was jihad in every single one of their khilafah, but they didn't fight people till they accepted Islam. In fact, the entire Muslim khilafah, the land of all Muslims, is over 75% non-Muslim for almost 2 centuries. From the time of Rasulullah's death until the Abbasids take over and then some, the majority of the ummah is non-Muslims, meaning the people underneath Islamic rule. The vast majority of them are not Muslim. In the time of Umar Khattab, by the end of his khilafah, it's estimated that 5% of the land they controlled was Muslim. That means 95% of people who live there, by the end of the death of Umar Khattab or Uthman ibn Affan, the majority of the world's Christians live under Islamic rule. So they weren't fought until they became Muslim. Or else why would they left alive for 200 years? To accept Islam gradually over 2 centuries. That's only after 2 centuries that Islam became the majority. So that's another clear indicator that's not what it means. Also, someone might say, well, you're backtracking and using statistics and whitewashing your own history. This is the classical interpretation of all Muslim the majority of Muslim scholarship since the inception of this hadith. This isn't something I'm coming up with now. This is something you could look up from 5 centuries ago, from 10 centuries ago, that they said this is not what it means. That Islam doesn't have as an objective to fight people until they all become Muslim. It's not the objective of this hadith. It's not what it means. So this is something that you could backtrack for centuries of our scholarship in a time where it's perfectly okay to say this. You didn't have to worry about it and wonder how am I explain it to people. It's just like, hey, everyone does this. Everyone does conquest and expansion, so do we. That would have been a perfectly fine answer for centuries, and yet it was not the answer in Islamic scholarship. So what was the answer? What's the explanation? We'll do that next week. But what was the point of this experiment? Never be on the defensive. You have no reason to be on the defensive for several reasons. These are a few of them. What I just mentioned now, the biography of Rasulullah himself, the biography of his companions immediately thereafter, and our own traditional Islamic scholarship's commentary and understanding of all of these things is in line with complete justice and compassion and logic. It is those people who are trying to put you on the ropes whose history is soaked in blood. That there's no civilization who ever tried to make a claim against our deen except that they're knee-deep in it. Least of all today's societies. Any country that's considered in the West or the global North has no right to open its mouth and even ask a question except in the way of humble, simple learning. Don't ever be put on the ropes for any reason. When they point at you, their fingers are dripping with blood, with injustice, with subjugation, with slavery and oppression of whole-scale societies for decades. And they're actively engaged in it today as we see in front of our very eyes and denying it in front of our faces. Don't you dare ever be on the ropes about your deen or feel like, how can I explain this? You should never ever feel like that, because no one has the right to ever bring it up against this deen which only came with justice and compassion. And even in the use of force, it's only under certain conditions and with certain parameters that are completely encapsulated by this ultimate justice and this logical progression of thought, as we will see inshallah next week. There was a hand here? Sorry. So the explanation of the hadith we'll do next week. What does this mean? Who are the people? Does it apply to everybody? Must they be fought until they accept Islam? What was the scholarship, the Islamic scholarship behind this? Next week we will also do hadith number 14. So we're going to do 8 and 14. Why? Because 14 is in what the Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, that their wealth and their property is safe from me, except with the right of Islam. What is the right of Islam that would make someone's wealth and blood no longer safe? That's hadith number 14, so we might as well take them together. 8 and 14 we'll do next week, inshallah. Go ahead, Abdullah. Mhm. I'm not sure if it was fulfilled, if they died, or what was their end in the story. We could check that out. But yeah, it was a harsh dua against them, and it may not be a direct dua, because we know that does it. I don't know this specific situation, but we know in certain situations the Prophet ﷺ rebuked people with something that sounded like a dua but wasn't, like thakalatka ummuk, may your mother lose you. It was like an expression of shock or of disdain. So this could be the case here, but it sounds like an actual dua, but I don't know the end of the story. So it's possible to go both ways. We should check it out. Yes, Yusuf? Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. Possible. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Going once? It's your last chance. Don't come up to me afterwards and say I had a question. Just say it now. Sure, go ahead. We spoke about receiving it, didn't we? What did we say, guys? Refresh our memory. Huh? To do it the same way you would give it? To receive it the same way you would give it? You have humility. So, if it's something that's true, that's the first thing to analyze. Is this true? Am I benefiting from this? Can I take this positively? Even if the package is horrible. We see the example of Umar al-Khattab and the stories that we mentioned, that the package is not always the best. But if you can benefit from it, see, how can I benefit from this? How can I take this positively and I grow from it? This person, whether they had good intentions or bad intentions, if it's true, how can I come out the winner? So if they say, like, this was absolutely horrible, you're the worst, they should fire you, I can't believe that people stand you, this is something that you did wrong. And that part is true. You could just erase everything else and see the true part and get to work on it. I know that's difficult to do and takes a lot of swallowing your pride or ignoring a lot of negativity. But if there's some truth to it, try to capitalize on that and take it to your advantage, which you will implement it. If none of it is true, then you just smile, you wave, and you walk away. Thank you. See you later. And that's the end. If none of it is true and there's no positive criticism here or no feedback that is actually applicable or makes sense, it's just them cursing you out or making fun of you, or none of it is applicable in a positive way, then there's nothing you can do. You just say, okay, I'll be the better man or better woman. I don't know if that's something people say, but I'll be the better person. And I'm going to just walk away. There's nothing that I need to do here. None of what you said is true. None of it is beneficial to me. None of it is applicable. And I'll just walk away because you're just professing, harm towards me or evil. There's nothing wrong with that. You never want to respond in kind. So when you're receiving nasiha, look for something that's true, something that you could apply, see how you could apply it, and try to be the better person if it's not being delivered in the best fashion. So always, the main thing is always look, is there truth in what's being said? Does it really apply to me? Do I have a temper? Am I too vulgar sometimes? Do I joke sometimes? Consider it and see how you can apply it, and that's it. Take it to heart, or don't take it to heart the way they say it, but do take it to heart what they actually say, if it's true. So that's my main advice to everyone. Look for the truth in it and try to apply it. If there is no truth, go about your life and pretend it never happened. Yeah.
Similar to the hadith, Allah says, like, "Watu alladhina la yu'minuna billahi wa la bil yawmil akhir," for example. So the Catholic hears that and they're like, okay, Allah, your God told you to kill people who don't believe in.
You didn't say to kill them. You said to fight them. Yeah.
Similarly, wouldn't they just say, like, your Lord is an aggressor, for example? They don't just
So did Islamic history, starting from Rasulullah fight these people non-stop? No. So that's answer number one. Like, it's not at face value. Is there offensive and defensive warfare in Islam? Yes. It's not just defensive, there's also offensive. But it has certain ways of understanding it that are necessary before we can answer that, which will take more time, which we'll do next week. But that's the whole point of the hadith. Because this is not talking about defense now. He said I was commanded to fight people till they stop attacking us. This is offensive. So in what cases, what warrants offensive warfare in Islam, and under what rubric is what we'll talk about next week if they don't shut us down. Anyone else? Jazakumullah khairan everyone. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.